Hi, everyone. My name is Chris Sprague from Persimmon Health. I am a serial entrepreneur working on healthcare technology that helps more people access better quality of care. This podcast is for the movement of innovators, entrepreneurs, intrapreneurs, and thought leaders that are advancing the American healthcare system through digital health. In this podcast, we highlight real stories of innovators and enablers of digital health, their opportunities, challenges, and learnings for innovation. We'll cover topics such as startup building and fundraising, entrepreneurship, emerging technologies, and big ideas to transform healthcare. We invite you to participate in this community, share your stories, and accelerate the movement. Thank you. We have an awesome pod. Enjoy.
Is the CEO of Base 10 Genetics, a company focused on making genetics testing actionable to improve consumer health outcomes. He is a serial healthcare innovator, both inside and outside of health systems. Base 10 is his third startup in healthcare. He's directed EHR implementations as a practicing physician, and Michael is active in helping the next generation of physician entrepreneurs, both with the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs and his alma mater at the Northwestern Feinberg School of Medicine. We're here today to hear Michael's learnings and advice stemming from his journey in becoming an entrepreneur, his failures and successes, and his sharings with other digital health entrepreneurs who are just now taking the leap. Michael, welcome to the pod. We got to know each other last year when I reached out to you wanting to learn about the mindset and pathways for physicians that become entrepreneurs. And I found our conversation insightful, and I'm excited to talk around those insights. So starting out, would you mind telling our audience briefly about yourself and anything you're currently working on?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Chris. It's a pleasure to be on the cast. Appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about my personal journey from being a physician to being an entrepreneur. Both which quite frankly could be quite vague for folks as to what that means, right? Because there's not exactly a certificate when it comes to the title entrepreneur. So my background, I am an internal medicine, geriatric medicine doctor. Geriatric medicine is the focus on elderly physiology. It's always been my passion. In fact, I usually tell folks at the age of 8, I knew I want to be a doctor. By the age of 12, I knew I want to specialize in helping the elderly. So that's exactly what I did. Definitely was not one of those guys where, during college or med school or residency thought I would ever own a business. I was so focused on becoming a doctor. That's my passion. In college, it's not like I had, computer science or other type of majors. I was cell molecular biology. I didn't take any breaks in between med school and residency because I didn't need to explore what else I want in life. I knew what I wanted in life. And it was really only after I started practicing, as most physicians will probably tell you, is that you come out to practice and on day one, you start see the brokenness of healthcare. And you start to realize that what they taught you in school, what you trained for years to do, becomes very limited in your ability to change the population at scale. There's only so many of us. There's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many things you can try to squeeze into those hours, and trying to take care of more and more people while giving less and less time is definitely a challenge that every physician will see. And that's why every physician at some point do say that we want to adopt technology. But at the same time, we're in a very difficult sector, right? Healthcare is not where you can try things and see what happens, because if things don't go well, you're talking about lives, right? So on the one hand, healthcare is a space where physicians want innovation. They do try innovation. That's why you see all these new drugs and new devices and even apps, right, coming to market. But it's also the market with the hardest adoption of those technologies, because people want to be conservative and they don't want to make mistakes. So it's a very interesting intersection of challenges that I feel physicians specifically and other clinicians have an opportunity to really make a difference.
Got it. And as a physician, you're one of the most highly trained professions that we have in our society, and have a lot of skills, the ability to learn a lot in a short period of time, or you could argue a long period of time. What skills, knowledge, or mindset do you think coming as a physician are transferable to being an entrepreneur?
So a lot. In fact, I'll even step back and say a lot of doctors, a lot of us, a lot of my colleagues for sure, at some point in time, think about getting other degrees, right? That could include going back and getting a master's in public health, master's in informatics.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of physicians definitely think about an MBA, right? And one thing I'll say is that, first of all, an MD is still one of the few degrees you can't get online for a reason. It is a very unique set of skills and training and experience that just doesn't translate well in an online program. So I want physicians to recognize that you have a very unique experience. And quite frankly, a lot of other clinicians, whether you're a pharmacist or nurse, right, you don't get those degrees online. You get those by taking care of patients, right, ultimately. So that's a very unique experience that we have to first acknowledge. Now, in order to do that well, there are definitely a lot of those what you call transferable skills, right? So we have to have great bedside manners. We have to learn how to get somebody comfortable in sharing information with us. And that, quite frankly, and if you want to translate that over to, say, for example, sales, that's called the discovery phase, right? Like we're trying to diagnose a patient, but it's not a big difference between you diagnosing a patient versus you trying to diagnose the symptoms and the root cause problems of a business or a process or an operation. There's also a lot of skills that physicians have to gather in terms of coordinating the different resources that we have, right? So most of us know that sometimes we go over where we feel comfortable, we need to get a consult, right? Or we need to get more information, such as doing a test or doing an X-ray, right, to get more information. That similar mentality can be translated to business, where we can say, okay, I think I'm about to cross the threshold of what I know between medicine and what's business medicine, and it's time to get a consult, right? It's time to get, I don't have an MBA. Right. Let's get somebody with that MBA training. Let's get someone with that law degree. Let's get someone with that patent law firm to come in and consult for me, right? That's a skill set that we sometimes forget to translate over when we go from being a clinician to being a business owner. But it's there. If you finish med school, if you finish residency, if you started practicing after residency, those soft skills are 100% ingrained in you. But it does take some deep, conscious, intentional soul searching to say, do I have that skill set, and how exactly do I apply it in a different place like entrepreneurship or business?
Yes, and I think as someone who's been through the startup rodeo many times, one of the biggest pedagogies within startup development is lean startup. It's also one of the most prevalent methodologies in health system transformation, and it is basically founded on the scientific process that you mentioned, which is if I have a hypothesis, I need to create an experiment, test it out, make sure I'm measuring the impact, and then see if it works and learn from that. And what I'm hearing too is that you're used to filling your own knowledge gaps or expertise gaps by consulting with someone outside of, let's say, just your brain, when you need that to fill in your gaps. And that is an incredible advantage that a lot of first-time entrepreneurs don't have. How about any of the biases or skills that you had to unlearn coming from a physician and making your world into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, we definitely pick up a lot of bad habits, right? When you are that vertically trained in a particular field of knowledge for years, you definitely pick up some bad habits. And my advice to fellow physicians is that much similar to the previous question where we talked about what are skill sets that are transferable, you also have to realize what are skill sets that are not transferable, right? So our expertise in knowing medicine very, very well doesn't necessarily translate to how that medicine product, and when I say medicine, I don't necessarily mean drugs, but even if it's a problem, right? So I really understand how to take care of the senior citizens when it comes to dementia. That doesn't necessarily mean that I know how to design an app perfectly well to be utilized by somebody with dementia. I certainly do not know what is the pricing model when you want to go sell this app to a hospital versus a doctor's clinic versus a nursing home versus the insurance company, right? So we have to be very good at recognizing when we have certain knowledge and skill set that don't transfer, and go back to saying and build a team, right? Just like in our medicine practice, we alone cannot memorize every single medication, drug interaction, and everything. That's why we have pharmacists on our team. We alone cannot be gathering information and taking care of the patient in terms of figuring out their plan of treatment while staying at the bedside, helping them with, turning over and feeding them, right? That's why we have our nurse colleagues who are doing a lot of that heavy lifting for us, right? So you always need a team. And I think a lot of physician entrepreneurs, when they first start, we go through this phase of where we need something to hold on to, right? We need some sense of self-worth and esteem. So we take our knowledge in medicine and we unintentionally and usually unconsciously end up thinking that because I know that very well, I therefore know everything around the business of making this product go to market. And I can tell you that very, very rarely does that actually come true. Most of us, including myself and others who have become better over the years of being an entrepreneur, is that we have to learn that if we are so sure about one thing, that's usually when you're wrong, right? Just like in medicine, like when you're so sure it's cancer, it turns out to not be it, right? When you're so sure it's infection, it turns out to be something else. So you never want to be so sure of your ideas in one day that you would never be open to potential other feedback. And I think that's something that a lot of physicians do. Unfortunately, I would say 9 out of 10 of us will make that mistake at least 4 or 5 times as we are transferring from being a physician to an entrepreneurial role, or perhaps as an executive leader within a company.
Right, unless you're Dr. House, in which case the answer is and always will be lupus.
Yeah,
right?
And that show basically is the epitome of when of saying how doctors could, you can try to be him, but that rarely ever works out. He's that 1 out of 10.
Yes. And so, yes, there's a difference between understanding your user, let's say the patient that you've been serving day in, day out, and understanding how to solve their problems with technology. And there's a difference between understanding the business of healthcare and being able to build a business around a healthcare application. And you've built a team that helps flesh out those gaps that you may have. How do you go about building a team as you're starting a company? What are some of the things you look for, or some of the channels that you look to? And
that's a great question, because it really does come down to that. It is about teams. In fact, I will even tell you that when you're pitching to investors, right? Don't get me wrong, they will dig into your numbers. But at the end of the day, the best products and the best business plans have been destroyed by bad teams. So at the end of the day, investors, clients look at your team to see if you're able to deliver. And by the way, that's very similar in medicine, right? It's not just, yes, I like that doctor, but do I also like this hospital? Do I think this hospital can provide me with the care, right? So it is a team approach. So let's go back to the basics. So how do you put together a team? Well, first and foremost, you certainly have to find members of the team that are brought into your vision, or at least you share a vision, right? So again, it's not my vision and you guys all have to agree to it. It's more like, here's our vision. We all have to agree to that. What is, and you have to be able to articulate that very, very well, right? Are we here to change X for whom, right? That's the very first thing, is making sure that anybody you are meeting, that you're thinking about assembling to your team, have the same amount of passion and conviction around that's the problem that we want to solve. Okay, that's number one. The next thing to do is to definitely look for members of the team. Like I said, you want to build a multi-specialty, I'll use that word, a multi-specialty team, right? You don't want to just find other people who are exactly the same as you, because then that would be the same as if I want to get a consult, I usually want to get it from someone who's trained differently or has spent a significant amount of time learning something else, right? I don't want to ask, hey, is this a heart attack, to another internal medicine doctor? right? Because the two of us are trained relatively the same, right? Versus if I want to say, is this a heart attack? I probably want to consult a cardiologist, right? So it's the same thing. So you want to build a team where it's not just all people who only will say yes to the exact same things you're saying. So while you're sharing the same vision, you don't want the same answers per se, right? So you don't want to say the way we're solving problem A is always with solution B. You want to agree on problem A being the thing you guys are passionate about solving. But then the solution part, this is where you want the team to have different perspectives. You want them to approach it from a software perspective. You want to approach it from a pricing and go-to-market type of perspective. You want to approach it from a legal perspective, right? You are the guy as the clinician who will always approach it from the medical and hopefully the patient perspective and your colleagues' perspective. But you need people on the team who's going to say, that's great, except insurance companies don't care about that. So if you want to sell it to insurance companies, we're going to have to build it like this. That's great, Michael, but you know what? If you're hoping to put this on the shelves of pharmacies for people to pick up, then you can't package it that way, or you can't offer these particular things because one, FDA won't allow you, or two, it's just not within a model that consumers can easily consume, right? So you do need a diversity on your team that will offer you different perspectives of how to get to a solution.
Right. And I think that makes sense. And that's why venture capital and other investors look at the team above and beyond any other factor when they're trying to evaluate which companies to invest in, because as they say, the best laid plans of mice and men go to waste, or as Mike Tyson said more eloquently, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And it's the quality of the team that is going to adapt. Now, speaking of being punched in the face, per se, you're a serial entrepreneur and you have probably many learnings en route, or times that things didn't go as planned and you had to adapt. Could you share with the audience just a few lessons you've learned from failures or challenges that maybe made you stronger in the current startup?
Some of the things we touched on a little bit. Definitely, my earlier failures were due to poor teams. And I'm not saying it's because the people that are recruited, it's that maybe I wasn't even evolved enough as a leader to leverage that team. So that's something to be aware of. You could put together a great team, and if you're the leader and yet you have, poor organization skill, too much ego, right? Too much conviction. Conviction is good. I mean, but too much conviction where you're unwilling to bend can mean that you can have a great team, but they're just, they're marching to your drum, not the drum of the team, right? So a couple of my earlier failures, I would say, was due to having a great team, but perhaps not leveraging them very, very effectively. Okay. And on that part, there's only a few things you can do. Again, if we're talking about degrees, I don't think they necessarily teach you that by getting a degree. I've seen plenty of people with degrees, like MBAs, that are poor leaders, that are poor organization, that are poor inspiration, right? So a degree doesn't necessarily give you that per se. So it's something that you have to. But this part, I guess we can also say that physicians are also very good at. We're good at finding mentors, right? So this is where I went out and found other physician leaders who emulated what I thought I want to become, right? So they were very eloquent, they were very empathetic, yet they were also very direct, right, when they want something. So looking for models that you can emulate is very, very important early on in your transition to an entrepreneur. The sooner you do it, the better, because you don't want to make those mistakes. The second thing that I would say were punches in the face is fundraising. Very, very unfamiliar to physicians, right? So we don't tend to do that part. Now, you could absolutely, and you should absolutely have members on your team who are good at fundraising. But remember, if you are the founder / co-founder / CEO of the company, at the end of the day, the investors will look to the CEO or the founders as their conviction as whether they want to invest or not. So you do have to learn how to pitch, right? You do have to learn how to talk about your vision. And on this part, probably the most specific recommendation I can give you is don't be a doctor when you're doing that. I know you know your drug and your device or your app inside out. Do not over-explain it. That is the same thing as when you go to a patient's bedside and they say, should I take this treatment? And you explain the science or the molecular level of the drug. Patient's not going to get it, right? Same thing. You want to get very good at explaining what your product can do for industry. Like you have a solar panel. Most of us don't know what solar panels exactly how they work. But we do know that if you install them correctly, they help the environment. They help you with your bills. Right? You don't need to know the intricacies of that. Same thing. So when we're the leaders of the team and you are pitching for capital, you have to go through many. So I can tell you that I at any given year I probably pitch almost 150 to 250 times to different people. You have to practice. It's just like medicine. You don't get good suturing by watching a YouTube and you do one suture and suddenly you're an awesome, wound fixer, right? You have to do it over and over and over again. So be ready to have, maybe not punch in the face, but be ready to have a lot of slaps when you're out there doing your pitches. But it's a necessary part of your job as the leader of the company to help get the resources your team needs to grow.
Got it. And whether we're talking about role models or mentors or co-founding team members, how do you go about looking for those people?
I love your questions, Chris. So at the risk of being hated on by very inspirational colleagues, right? Here's what I'll say. Early on in your entrepreneur life, you can get inspirations from the physicians who are on stage, but guys, those are the shiny, shiny stars. I mean, they gotten to a point where they're just giving TED Talks, right? Like, that's great. But remember, before they got there, they did a lot of work of actually accomplishing things before they get there. Those are not the guys to emulate, right? Because you might be able to emulate their communication skills, but aside from that, it's very hard to emulate those folks, right? So the folks you should look for are probably folks that are in your industry, right, or in your sector. I'll explain that in a little bit more, what that means. That are probably just a couple steps ahead of you, right? So, for example, if you are a researcher in academia and you're researching the next compound or something to become the next drug, right? What you want to do is you want to network with physicians who are probably 2 levels above that, where they have already created one, they've commercialized it, maybe they're now acquired and working for Pfizer, right? Those are the guys that can really help you understand what are your next 2-3 years going to look like as you're going from a clinical researcher or a medical researcher to taking your product to quote unquote a market or an exit, right? If you are thinking about building a software app to do XYZ, there are physicians, there are CMOs that are at other companies that are maybe not the same app you're doing, but are doing some sort of app, right? So you can talk to them to see how you can get up there. The other thing too you can look at is go outside of physicians. Don't always think that MDs are only one. So later on, I learned that actually it's very helpful to network with quite frankly, anybody who's doing something that you're thinking about, but don't come from an MD background. So if you're really interested on how do I productize an app, well, there's a whole industry of product managers and app developers that you can talk to and say, and they can tell you like, this is how we got to our success, right? So definitely there's definitely models out there. You don't have to look for the shiniest star on stage, because chances are those guys are, first of all, they're probably too busy. And even if they like you, they can probably only give you a little bit of time, right? But you can usually look on social media, like LinkedIn is a great place to look, right? You can literally be very specific about who you're looking for and what software or what kind of industry or what sector, and you'll get a whole list of them, right? It just takes some time to go through that. And perhaps the last feedback I will say is just off of what I just said is you gotta learn to network. I can only speak for myself that when I first graduated out of residency, right, we spent so much time training. We only go to medical conferences, and when we go there, we only present research papers, right? So when I became an entrepreneur, I went to health tech conferences and VC conferences, and I really felt like I was in middle school again, where you're at this party and you didn't know who to talk to, and nobody's looking at you because they all have their own cliques, right? So you have to learn how to network, and you can't. Remember, if you became a doctor, you have to have some sort of great bedside manners, right? Patients have to not have been scared by you. Nurses have to like to work with you, right? So you got some people skills, right? So be confident in that. You just got to learn to apply that in a non-medical setting. So one of the exercises I recommend a lot of anybody, entrepreneurs, physician or otherwise, to do is make it a point on LinkedIn twice a week or twice a week to connect with somebody who you don't know and sincerely get to know them. Don't go into it with an agenda that you want to have business or pilot or get advice or nothing. Just go in there and be sincerely interested in what that person do and learn about what they do. And if you do that twice a week, and that's something I started 10 years ago, I still do that today. If you keep doing that, you're going to realize your ability to understand someone's background, make those connections to maybe your own business, but maybe someone else's business is going to start to happen. And that network, as it grows, is going to become extremely valuable to you when it comes to wanting to assemble your team or wanting to find models that you can emulate and so forth. So learn to network, guys. It's fun, and it's really absolutely going to help you.
Thank you, Michael. And yeah, I'd like to shift gears a little bit towards your journey to success with Base 10. But as we do that, I think it'd be helpful for our audience and for me to define a few of the things that you work on. So starting with, what is precision nutrition?
So
why is that important?
I'll tell you, like, even right now, when my current company, Base 10, one of the learning that we're learning is how do we message ourselves, because it's very clear that on our public facing website, sometimes people think we're a genetics company. We do genetics. Some people think we're a software company. We do software. So I would say personally, right now, one of the things I'm learning as an entrepreneur is marketing messaging, right? Like nothing to do with medicine, but just how do you talk about yourself? Who are you, right? As a company to the outside world. So precision nutrition is actually just a small piece of what Base 10 is focused on. Base 10, on our broader vision, want to solve the problem of where there are great precision technologies, but they don't become standard of care, right? So genetics is an example of one. Genetics was, I think the Human Genome Project was done in 2007, right? We mapped the human genome in 2007. That was before the first iPhone. And yet most of us do not have genetic testing as a routine part of our healthcare, right? We maybe screen babies for some things. We maybe screen adults for some things. Definitely use it for cancer when we're trying to figure out your chemo. But genetics as a technology is extremely cheap and extremely powerful. And yet somehow after this many years where touchscreen phones are everywhere, we don't have genetics everywhere, right? So Base 10 was founded to try to figure out how can we help bring technologies that are like genetics, but it could be a drug, it could be a device, it could be anything, to the common market faster. Okay, so along those lines, we do believe that there is a lot of correlation between nutrition and genetics that have been well researched and yet underutilized, right? We only use it for kids with genetic metabolic disease, right? This kid was born with literally some sort of deficiency where they can't process meat protein, and they would die if you gave them that, right? We only use it in that extreme example, but there's a whole range of folks, especially as we get into aging, right? Where figuring out your genetics and correlating that to your nutrition is super helpful, but we don't do it, right? Same thing with medication genetics, or what we call pharmacogenomics. In fact, nowadays the data is getting better and better where genetics, as in terms of determining whether you're going to respond to certain psych medications, are extremely powerful, but we don't do it. And we don't do it on everyone. We don't do it on people with the diagnosis of a mental health condition that need that medication, right? So it's one of those things where that's what Base 10 is built to figure out how we can commercialize. How can we use software as the foundation of creating a platform on which all these new technologies can be plug and play, whether it's genetics, whether it's wearable, whether it's a new vaccine, right? How can we plug these things into the continuum of a patient's care so that these technologies, instead of staying on the shelf somewhere that the doctor doesn't even know about or the insurance company doesn't even know that they can pay for to make the patients even better, right? How do we use software to create that foundation so that these things can come to life sooner into the market?
Right. And can you give an example of how it works? So how you've plugged in some of these new precision nutrition or medication into the continuum of care and from a user's perspective or from the industry's perspective?
So quite
how does
simple,
base 10 work?
actually. So we've already entered the era in medicine where human beings cannot be relied on as the most updated and most reliable source of knowledge. Okay. I know a lot of physicians may disagree with me on that because some of us, it's our ego, right? We're the top of our class. We memorize more than everybody else, and that's why we're doctors. Okay, yeah, got it. However, right, we're talking about an age where look how quickly in COVID we came up with vaccines. Look how quickly the scientific knowledge of understanding this virus progressed every single week. And if I ask today, today being August 1st of 2022, how many of you physicians on the phone know everything you need to know about monkeypox? I bet you a lot of you would be unsure that you are the most up to date. You're like, oh, I'm going to consult an infectious disease doctor. Good answer, because chances are we aren't staying up to date as much as we hope anymore. Again, human beings, limited hours, limited brain cells, can't memorize everything, right? So it is a time in healthcare where software has to help take over that, right? So instead of having the human person, again, whether that's a nurse or a pharmacist or doctors, I talk about doctors, but it's really all of us, right, in the clinical world. You can't count on us to remember everything because we probably didn't read about it because we were too tired yesterday taking care of patients to read. We may not remember when we're that tired that, oh, the next treatment plan is this, right? So that's what Base 10 is trying to do. We're trying to create a standard safety net in terms of medical knowledge. Let the software stay up to date with what is supposed to be done next. But let the clinician, let the human beings decide whether the information presented is enough for them to make a decision going forward. And that's the basis of Base 10. We call ourselves a decision support platform. We bring in updated knowledge and algorithms, and those algorithms monitor the data to say, when do we think there is a case of monkeypox, for example? Even if you as a physician have never seen one before, because I can tell you right now, I haven't seen one since I graduated years ago, right? So I haven't seen one. I'm seeing them now, but that doesn't mean I'm the expert in monkeypox. But if the software can say, these are all the signs and symptoms that could be monkeypox, capture that and flags a case. And the physician then get to say, well, then based on these information, that does look like it. And in fact, I don't even know what the next test diagnosis what test would I do to confirm monkeypox? And the software actually suggests it for you. That's great, right? Because then that allows you as a clinician to say, I'm processing the data to make a decision as to what we need to do versus spending the time grabbing the data and trying to identify a case, which, like I said, is just unscalable given the limited number of clinicians we have these days.
And we talk a lot about the business models of healthcare on this podcast, whether that's fee for service or value-based care or direct-to-consumer. Can you just walk us through maybe one of Base 10's use cases and who you offer your services to, who the users are, is the patient involved, and
there's a lot of go-to-market strategy, guys, and believe me, there's a lot of startups that I would say, if you pick the wrong go-to-market strategy or you pick the wrong sector to go into, you could definitely have a great product and still fail. Okay, so it's something that's, I would say, just if you were taking notes, go-to-market strategy, super important. Make sure you have a good team that helps you figure that out. Okay, so in terms of what we designed as clinical decision support software, if you will, you could, in theory, apply that in many, many different settings. But what we decided to do was focus on the nursing home or the long-term care sector. One, because I'm a geriatrician, that's my area of passion, right? But the other part is because we do see that the care of our elderly in this country, despite U.S. being a very technologically driven society, we don't see those technologies necessarily being incorporated into the care of the elderly population, which is why you will see the bad outcomes that we all heard about around the news, right? Regarding when COVID happens in the nursing home, how many people die there, right? Or when there's an outbreak, how it took a long time before we know it happened, right? Those are all examples of where there's not a strong presence of technology to help deal with the lack of staffing, the lack of human beings that could keep that process up, right? So for Base 10, what we have done in the last 3 years was to focus our technology platform in helping the nursing home sector. And it's the same thing we just talked about, where we're able to grab data from the patient's chart. So the nurses are going about doing their work. They're charting if the patient's feeling well, not feeling well, what do they do? They're doing their regular work. But that information is coming into our software, and the software is processing and say, what do we think is happening with every single one of those patients each day, right? And the ones that look like they're about to have problems with a certain whatever, right, infection or heart failure event, whatever the case may be, it's flagged to the provider along with all the information to say, here's what you can do next. So they don't even have to spend too much time thinking like, okay, do I get a test or do I get a medication going or do I get an echo? It's recommended in there. If you agree to it, all you have to click and it goes, right? So it's really shortening the amount of time it takes for us to react to when someone's not doing well in a nursing home, in the nursing home setting. So that's been our focus for the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And we've done well. We're expanding to even more nursing home facilities throughout the country. We're probably going to triple the number of nursing home facilities on our platform this year. It's very exciting times for us, but we're just happy to see our vision come true, right? We want to help the elderly population. We want to lower the death rate that happens, right, in that population, and we're happy to see that what we're doing is contributing to that, along with our nursing home partners and clients.
Yes, and usability is often something that comes up in terms of these experiences that have a clinical side and then have some side on, let's say, a patient or a caregiver. So on the patient side, especially in the elderly population, there's almost no technology affinity. Caregivers or nurses may not be used to a new technology or a new set of data that's come to market, and they need somebody to actually humanize it for it to be actionable for them. And then on the physician side, there is this concept of alert fatigue, and people just not having the time to analyze a dashboard themselves. I'm just wondering how much you had to triage those types of user experiences.
All the time.
To the success
that's probably one of the hardest things if you want to be an entrepreneur in the healthcare arena, is that the user support user experiences is extremely crucial to the adoption of your technology. And again, that could be a drug too, right? Imagine if the inhaler was much harder than it is to use right now. It's still hard, right? Like we sometimes still worry if kids don't do it right? But so you have to think about, if you don't do it well, then that inhaler doesn't work and you're just throwing meds in the air, right? So happens the same thing with software as well. So this is where it's very important early on to make sure that you do have members of your team who have that very specific user experience. That's early on, right? Because early on as a startup, you may not have the money to go do a focus group. I didn't, right? So, but the great thing is that I worked in nursing homes. I have colleagues that work in nursing homes. I have lots of nurses who are right? So you have to spend that time to make sure as you're building your product to show it to as many people that you think are going to be using the product. It's a fine dance, because I know a lot of technology companies can say, well, if you get too much feedback, then your product's scope kind of gets a little bit muddy. You're right. But remember, there's a whole pool of talent called product managers and user experience, development. I mean, that's why you need those people on your team, right? Or if you can't get those people on your team, there are vendors, there are firms, there are design firms out there, there are research firms out there, right, that can help you with this. So very important to have that. But the only way I can say is no matter how much you spend time designing a product, it's never going to be, I'll just say it, it's never going to be adopted well in your first 10, maybe even 100 clients. You're going to get very, very blunt and very negative feedback. It doesn't matter if you spent 2 years designing it, guys. You come out and the nurses and doctors are going to immediately hate it, right? That's okay. What's important is to make sure that you have very responsive teams and attitude to say, okay, yes, that's bad. Okay, how can we change it within a day, right? So make sure that as you're building your product, you need to be ready. You need to build it with the intent that it's going to fail. And that's funny because that's also medicine, right? Like we doctors don't go and say, all right, I'm going to give IV fluids. And you think that's going to work every single time? No, we don't know that. So that's why when we give something, right, to a patient, we have a plan A, B, C, and then we have a D, E, F, and then we probably have it all the way up to J, right? Because we're expecting certain things to not work. And that's a great mentality to have when you're building products for healthcare. You have to go into it with the hypothesis that it's going to fail. And if you go into it with that mentality, you'll actually spend the time to plan for that failure, right? As a company, to say, all right, well, if the software doesn't work, or if the users hate it and they stop using it within a day, then we're ready to go do X, or at least you have resources built in to say, we don't even know what they're going to ask us to change. Maybe it's just the button, but maybe it's like a whole entire screen of functionality. But you're building it because if you're expecting it to fail, you would be building in the extra resources and time, right, to respond to that. So that's something that I would say usability is key. It will absolutely fail you the first several times. So just be ready for it by having the extra resources and bandwidth, rather than hope for the best. And then all of a sudden now you're kind of stuck, right, trying to react to something that you didn't have resources for.
Yes, and at Persimmon, we often look at startups in terms of 3 stages. So first is showing proof that a idea has value to some target market. The second is becoming viable by actually implementing in practice and establishing that, hey, it does provide value to that market. And then the third is once you know that, achieving scale. I'm curious about that first stage of showing proof of when and how did Base 10 start to feel different than, let's say, some of your previous startups? How did you know you were on the path?
So the concept I would introduce here is push versus pull. Okay. If you had to push and push and push, now don't get me wrong, startup, and you're always going to have to push a little bit. Okay. So the product is never going to sell itself. That's not true. It's always you pushing it through to some degree. But how much push, right? If it's 100% always you pushing to get something into the hands of someone, it's always you having to push 100% of the time before they use it, then there's probably not a great product or solution problem fit there, right? It's not to say your solution's bad, it's not working, right? Just like, quite frankly, I mean, we try to push patients to take medications. They don't do it, right? Like the compliance is horrible. So the medication's great, but there's something still missing even right now in terms of how medications are given, right? We're still on pills and shots and right and vapors. If there's a different delivery mechanism, you could probably make that more compliant, right? So those are things to think about. When we, as Base 10, when we knew we had a great, well, I'll give you so our technology platform, like I said, you can design whatever disease program you want. You can do a nutrition program, you can do a medication program, you can do a diabetes program. When we came to market, it was around diabetes, right? Because we said, hey, a lot of people have diabetes. We can be relevant to the market right away. Within 4 months of us going to market with our diabetes example as a program on our technology platform, COVID hits. Nobody cared about diabetes, right? Now, if you have a great product, you should be able to address the needs of the market. So we were still dealing with nursing home. They just said, hey, we don't really want to focus on diabetes right now. We need to focus on this infection called COVID. So we designed an infection control program within 4 weeks on our platform. And that's when, we're talking about push versus pull. We didn't have to push very hard. I mean, nursing homes were just basically asking for anything that can help them get control of what's going on, get visibility to the population, get the testing recorded, reported correctly, right? So that's when we knew we had a great product market fit. And then we were able to take the lessons from that and say, well, let's not get over focused here. COVID is just another virus. There are hundreds of other viruses and bacteria that affect nursing homes. Can we take the same lessons here and apply it very quickly to those areas? Tested it out with just a small subset of facilities. Yes, it does. So we have a product that isn't just COVID. It can be for all infections. Let's go ahead and move it out that way. So that's how you can very much use your client to help you see if your product is solving their problems. Because quite frankly, guys, if it isn't, they're gonna say, hey, great, but we're not gonna use this going forward. That's the ultimate, answer to whether you are having a product market fit. Yeah, they won't come back. That's the biggest answer.
Yeah, your users will tell you, and they won't come back. Okay, and fast forwarding to today, where you're looking to land 3 times as many facilities this year as you had last year. You have product market fit. You've proved that you have a viable business, and now you want to scale your business. How has your role or the company evolved now that you're trying to scale the business as opposed to define it?
And I think a lot of physicians, there's always new challenges. If you're successful, you're just going to meet new challenges, right? So early on in the company, as the physician founder, a lot of the ideas of how a software should be built to manage disease and incorporate new technologies, that came from my brain, right? But as the company grew, the needs of the business change. And if you, as the physician or clinician, wants to remain the CEO or you want to remain in a certain position title, you have to deliver your duties to that. So as the company grows at Base 10, what it is right now, the CEO's job, despite me having an MD, isn't to come up with the latest product or disease per se. I still do every once in a while with the VP of product and VP of engineering, but my job as the CEO is to find resources to enable my team to keep making their work and their creativity happen. That means people, it means money, it means pilots, it means clients, right? So is that what I went to med school for? No. Is that 100% what I'm passionate about? No. I have to admit, I'm passionate about the product that we can design to help patients. But if I want to remain as the CEO of Base 10, then my job and my mentality has to shift to saying I need to serve the company in a different way. And quite frankly, if I can't serve the company that way or don't want to, then I need to step down, right? And that's a real question for physician entrepreneurs. If you're successful, you get a different problem. Do you want to stay as a physician, as the CEO? Because in that role, you can't keep going back in the lab every day and seeing what's going on with the development. You can't be going to all the software development meetings and figure out how that's not your job anymore. Your job is to raise money, buddy. Your job is to be out there letting people know about the company. Your job is to get investors to be confident in where you guys are going. And if you don't like that job, then you need to step down as the CEO, and you need to be prepared to do that, because otherwise you will get in the way of your own company's success. And like I said, that is something that I would say at this point in time I've started to transition to. I don't hate it. I think it's for me it's an exciting time to learn a different set of skills, but I do miss my days of having being able to meet for hours with the product team and the development team and really get into the algorithm and figure out like why did this code break or why did that button not work. But what they need me to do now as the leader of the company is to not that, but help ensure their resources in terms of talent and finance so that they can keep building what they're building.
Right. Yeah, and I will echo that experience and having trouble letting go of something that I thought, oh, well, I still know the most about that in the company, or I still may be the best at that. And I think the answer comes back to what you emphasize, which is team, right? Build a great team, hire people that you authentically believe are better than you in some way, and that will allow you to actually let it go. And be fully confident that, okay, now I need to be this master coordinator and enabler of others. And it helps if you believe they're that great. So we've talked about the past and
Yeah.
present.
Oh boy, I
what
mean
do you
that's
hope the future
you never want to
Base
get in
10
my mind about
holds?
that because it's also the job of the of you as the founder or to think
Okay.
about 2 years from now, right? I love what Jeff Bezos says, right? Like your team is executing today what you planned on 2 years ago. You should be planning what's going to happen 2 years from now. So sometimes I have to be very careful what comes out of my mouth because it's scared my team to thinking we're going to do what now. But I always say like, hey, look, the healthcare is one where you always have to keep adapting.
Right.
If Fujifilm can become a biotech company, right? Then I'm telling you, like you have to be ready to evolve. Future of Base 10, I think right now we're still on a great path towards becoming that foundation, right? We want to be the foundation that help new technologies become a standard of care of medicine. So the more disease programs we build on our technology platform, the more different type of technologies, genetics or whatever omics or whatever app or whatever device or treatment comes out can be plugged into that process, right? So we really want to see that happen for the next couple of years. But as it turns out, as you continue to get better and better at that, you also start to understand the business models, right, around, well, what could keep your software from getting the data it needs to function, right? And sometimes that means you have additional partnerships. Sometimes it means you start to vertically integrate. So the future of Base 10 may also be, in fact, we did last year where we bought our own lab. We're a software company. Why do you have your own lab? Well, because we saw an opportunity to improve the flow of the data between labs and our software. And quite frankly, we had a hard time working with other labs and getting their data in. So we said, you know what? Why don't we have our own lab? Because by having our own lab, we actually will now get to understand what laboratory information softwares look like, which we don't have access to. We'll actually get our hands dirty and saying, okay, if a sample needs to go from this location to the lab and the results back seamlessly, what are all the data point gates that we have to connect together to make that happen? And we couldn't do that by working with lab vendors. Not to say they weren't great. Some of them worked really hard with us, but at the end of the day, it still required us to get our hands dirty being in lab. So we ended up buying a lab and we're integrating that as part of our business. But the goal wasn't to build a lab. The goal was to understand how the data flows between us. And I think we're going to see more of that opportunity for Base 10 coming up.
Got it.
Sure.
Well, congratulations, Michael, on Base 10. And I just have two final questions. One is, for those budding physician innovators, entrepreneurs that have an idea and want to follow in Michael's footsteps, what would you advise as a first step that they can take or a community that they can reach out to in order
notice a lot of
to just
physicians
get off the
are not on
ground and
LinkedIn
on
or
that
even
journey?
remotely active on LinkedIn. Please do. It is, as much as LinkedIn has become a little bit, Facebook-ish over the last couple of years, it is still a very good professional network, and it is where I would recommend you go to start. The other thing I would encourage you to do, so as you mentioned earlier, I am a part of the Society of Physician Entrepreneurs. There sometimes it's a chapter there's usually a chapter in every state, but sometimes they kind of rise and fall depending on whether the leadership is still around or not. But it's a good place to start if you're looking to connect with like-minded physician entrepreneurs who are probably experiencing the same challenges you are to grow. But probably more important than that, I would say, is again, remember, there's a conference for everything these days, right? If you're going to do healthcare software, there's a health IT conference that you should be going to. If you're thinking about, doing a device, there are medical device conferences you're going to. Remember, these are not conferences you tend to have gone to in the past purely as a doctor, right? If I was purely as a doctor, I went to American Geriatrics Society conference. Great conference for geriatricians. Probably not the best conference if I'm trying to figure out app development, right? But there is one in October that is literally everything about SaaS, everything SaaS. Now, do you want to go there to find developers and investors? Absolutely. Is it healthcare focused? No, right? But you have to start looking outside of your comfort zone of medicine for these other networking opportunities.
Okay, yeah, you have shared a treasure trove of advice, Michael, and really appreciate that. I'm sure it's going to be valuable to all those budding physician entrepreneurs that are listening, and myself. I've learned a ton in our conversation. Now, I want to ask one final question that's more about the industry. So, the crystal ball question. We hear a lot that U.S. healthcare is sick care, rife with misaligned incentives, and all the other ways people say that our health system is broken today. I'm wondering, what is your take on that, and what would you say your ideal
Wow, that
state
is a
or a
big
better
question,
future state
big
is
final
for
question.
U.S. healthcare?
You could have a whole separate, no, all good, man. You could have a whole separate panel and talk on just
Sorry
that.
about that.
So acknowledging, first of all, that what I know today is probably still very limited in terms of how the entire U.S. healthcare system works. I would definitely say that it is true that there is a massive misalignment within regulatory payment models and the working clinicians. Okay, so there's definitely misalignment in incentives. So, for example, in order to help encourage the adoption of new testing technology like genetics, right? CMS will usually reimburse initially very well for those tests. Why? Because they want to encourage labs to buy the machines and to offer those tests as a possibility at their labs. However, at the same time, CMS says for nursing homes, but we're giving you a limited amount of money for the first 100 days of a patient's care, right? So you only have this much money for the first 100 days. Well, then the nursing home says, well, with this limited amount of money, I'm not going to go pay $400 for a genetics test, right? Because then that hurts my business. Now, I'm not saying that's bad for nursing homes. They want to do something, but maybe they can afford $40, maybe they can afford $100, maybe they can afford $200, but $400, right? Because that's what the lab's billing is not something I can pay for, right? But the lab was told to bill at $400 because that's what CMS says is what we're reimbursing you. In fact, you can't go too far below it because then you might hit some sort of red flag as if why are you offering the test cheaper than what they, right? So that's an example of where we really need more help. There's that you can't fix, right? Like that we can't fix as doctors. We can't fix that as software developers and entrepreneurs. That is where the best we can do is try to point those discrepancies out to the payers, to the politicians to say, hey, we know you had good intent here, and that method may have helped with the adoption of the technology at the lab, but it didn't help with the adoption of the technology on the physician or nursing home side because you're missing some piece. Now, we can point it out to you. I wouldn't say I'm brilliant enough to figure out exactly how to fix it for you, but that examples like that exist in healthcare everywhere. And that is one of the reasons why you can have great technologies, you can have great intent, like physicians and payers and regulators all want to make this happen. But we're still a little siloed in how these things are happening. So I would say one of the biggest challenges in the US is our payment model. I know there are people who on the call probably feel differently about single payer systems. It has its pros and cons, but one of the cons of our system of not being a single payer is that there is a lot of conflicting payment models that really inhibits the ability for physicians and patients to access new innovation. And that is something that I hope Base 10 will be able to help contribute in some way to fixing. I don't think we're the solution. I think it'll take a lot more than just us to have the ultimate solution. But that is definitely one of the biggest challenges of the U.S. healthcare system.
Michael, I want to thank you for your time. Really proud to know you and appreciative of the knowledge that you've dropped on me and the audience. And I know as we work on fixing the American healthcare system, big believer that Base 10 is going to be one of those companies that has the innovations ready to really improve the quality of care and clinical decision support.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure
Michael,
to be on.
Thank you for your time.
Take care now.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast and being a part of this movement. This podcast is brought to you by Persimmon Health, an offering by Leapfrog Technology that's purpose-built to help innovators imagine, build, and scale digital health products. We're passionate about fixing healthcare and have worked on over 50 digital health products. If you want to share your story or want to work together, please shoot an email to hello@persimmonhealth.com. Thank you once again, and I look forward to seeing you on the next podcast.